welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. We want to bring you the latest on what was really a remarkable story that broke late Friday in the New York Times. We didn't have time to address it then. According to what are apparently high-level sources within the Department of Justice, in 2017, the FBI secretly began an investigation into whether the president is in fact a Russian agent. The FBI apparently believed that President Trump could be a one-man sleeper cell, personally taking direct orders from his handlers in Moscow and working from within the Oval Office to subvert this country. The FBI said they believed that could have happened, so they spied, apparently, on the President of the United States. Well, shocking doesn't even begin to describe this story. Nothing like this has ever happened in this country. These allegations are literally without precedent. That is not overstatement. And by the way, the allegations are not true. The FBI did not find that Donald Trump is a Russian agent. No charges were ever filed against him. None will be. But an equally important question remains unanswered. How did this happen? Deciding that a sitting president should be investigated for treason is not a small thing. Officials within the FBI had to push for this investigation and then marshal evidence to justify it. Leaders at the very highest levels of the agency had to sign off on the whole thing. All of that happened. But on what grounds exactly? That's what we would need to know in order to understand this. Well, thanks to the Times story, we have some sense of the answer. And if you're imagining a secret transmitter covered in Cyrillic script discovered hidden in the Lincoln bedroom, no, think again. There were no cloak and dagger clues in this case, apparently. The FBI assumed that Donald Trump might be a Russian agent not because of anything he did in secret, but because of things he said in public, very public, standing on a stage, on camera, while running for president. Here's one of them.
There's nothing I can think of that I'd rather do than have Russia friendly as opposed to the way they are right now. Wouldn't it be nice if we actually got along, as an example, with Russia? I'm all for it.
That was then candidate Trump speaking at a press conference in Florida at Doral in July of 2016. According to the FBI, the words you just heard are evidence that Trump may have betrayed this country. That's their view. But there's another way to look at those words. Maybe Trump is right. Russia is a nuclear-armed power on the other side of the planet. It does not have the power to invade the United States. It can't close international shipping lanes. It does not seriously threaten our key allies like Japan or Great Britain. Is there some reason, then, that we should inherently be in conflict with Russia? Is there, moreover, vast public support in this country for fighting a proxy war in Syria with the Kremlin? And how many American parents are anxious to send their kids to die for the territorial integrity of Ukraine, an issue that we're supposed to think is very important? Well, outside a few neighborhoods in Washington, not very many people, it turns out. So Trump did raise a fair question at that press conference in 2016. In Washington, saying that out loud is considered treason.
Vladimir Putin policies almost being parroted by Donald Trump. You had Trump say only nice things about Putin. He never spoke ill about Russia.
Never spoke ill about Russia. That's the evidence a United States senator holds up to prove that the president may be working for our enemies. So maybe Trump does like Russia. Who knows? By the way, he's allowed to if he wants to. It doesn't make him evil. It just means he disagrees with prevailing orthodoxy in D.C., and that's okay. We're supposed to have spirited debates over questions like this, but no longer. Policy differences are now criminal offenses. Today on CNN, professional dumb person Max Boot listed 18 reasons that the president may be a Russian spy. If you looked at the reasons, a lot of them turned out to be political positions that Boot just doesn't agree with. Firing Jim Comey, pulling out of Syria, criticizing the European Union. And this is our favorite one, we're quoting, supporting populists. So the Permanent War Caucus in Washington has succeeded in criminalizing dissent from their agenda. That's what this is. And by the way, if it were happening in a less developed country, we'd know exactly what to call it. It's an attempted coup. A political leader gets elected on a platform that law enforcement agencies don't like. So those agencies try to put him in jail. It happens all the time in other places. Now it's happening here. Former FBI lawyer and anti-Trump activist Lisa Page described the FBI's thinking in her closed-door testimony before Congress. Russia is the most dangerous country in the world, Page reportedly said, because Russia works to, quote, weaken our ability, America's ability, and the West's ability to spread our democratic ideals, end quote. So spreading our democratic ideals, as with the Iraq War, is now the most important thing that America does, the one thing we must defend at all costs. When did FBI lawyers start talking like neocon propagandists? No wonder Max Boot is on board with this. Our entire media and political classes are with Max Boot and Lisa Page, too. They have lost their minds. This past September, NBC News breathlessly reported that Russia was using, quote, sophisticated microwaves to cause brain damage to U.S. diplomats in Cuba. No surprise there, really. It sounds like something those dastardly Russians would do just because. Well, now, months later, scientists have determined that the Kremlin probably didn't have anything to do with that. The real culprit? Noise from crickets. And by the way, not even Russian crickets. Indies short-tailed crickets. Non-Slavic crickets. Whatever. The media didn't correct the story. They ignored it and they moved on. They know who the bad guys are. Evidence does not deter their storyline. Russian espionage is so widespread, in fact, that the act of denying that you spied for Russia is now confirmation that you did. Watch.
Well, Christy, the president's tweet trying to make the case that he's not a Russian asset really just undercuts his own defense. The president's tweet couldn't have been scripted better if it was written by Putin himself. Someone has to have told the president that undercutting the FBI, insulting past presidents and members of the U.S. government, and criticizing their actions to keep us safe is really advancing Russia's mission. Our own intelligence community has said that those very things are exactly what Russia is after. So in the president's response, he's really just making Russia's job easier.
You say you're not a Russian agent, therefore you're a Russian agent. Who puts these people on TV? That's a question we should think about. Over the weekend, speaking of television, CNN President Jeff Zucker declared that anyone who isn't spreading fear of Russia is doing the bidding of Russia. Zucker didn't say that himself, of course. He rarely speaks in public. Instead, he sent his marionette out, as he often does, to deliver the message.
I was watching Good Morning America this weekend, and both mornings they led with snowstorms and scares at malls and other stories, and not this. And I just keep wondering if the public is ill-served if we don't make it really clear what the stakes of this story are. How can a morning show not lead with this drama, I guess is what I'm saying.
I think plenty of times we lead with this drama.
On cable, I agree.
So the eunuch heads to the steps of the palace and reads the proclamation. Message received, thank you very much. But take 3 steps back. Is the media's problem really that it doesn't talk about Russia enough? Doesn't seem like that's the problem.
Whether the president was working for Russia.
Whether Donald Trump was secretly working on behalf of Russia.
Whether Trump was secretly working on behalf of Russia.
Whether President Trump was secretly working on behalf of Russia.
Whether the president was secretly working with Russia against America.
Whether Trump was secretly working on behalf of the Russians.
Whether Trump was secretly working on behalf of Russia.
Whether President Trump was working on behalf of Russia.
Whether President Trump was working on Russia's behalf.
Whether the sitting president was secretly working for Russia.
Whether President Trump was working for Russia from the Oval Office.
Does every show on cable news have the same writer? Well, yeah, it's the DNC. You've heard the script so many times that it's like background noise, muzak in an elevator. We never pause to ask the obvious question, which is, does it make sense? Does what they're saying logically add up, that Trump is doing the bidding of Russia? I don't know. Let's assess it just for a second. If you were Russia, let's say you're Vladimir Putin, how would you try to undermine American interests? Well, you'd probably try to get America stuck in costly, expensive foreign wars. You'd look at Iraq and Afghanistan, you would say, those wars have made America much weaker. Why not try and replicate that experience in, say, Syria and Libya? You might encourage America to do that. You might also encourage the U.S. to adopt a self-destructive energy policy. You'd have the American government sharply restrict the exploration of oil and natural gas in the name of the environment, so that America produces less energy. Why would you do that? Because global energy prices would rise and the U.S. would have to import more. Who would that benefit? Russia, a petrostate. Their economy is dependent on energy. But Trump, and this is weird behavior for a secret Russian agent, has done just the opposite of that. The United States, for the first time in my lifetime, is an energy exporter. In fact, it's the largest producer of oil and gas in the world. Is that good for Russia? No, it's not. Who's pushing the opposite? Oh, weirdly, it's the left. They're the ones pushing a Green New Deal that would have this country shutting down oil and gas wells across the nation. Someday we're going to look back in shame and confusion and wonder how so many supposedly smart people went completely off the deep end. That's the task for future historians. For now, it is time for some radical transparency. Last fall, the president ordered the declassification and release of Carter Page's FISA application. How did an American citizen, who clearly didn't act as an agent for Russia, have his phones tapped and his email read by the federal government? On what basis? We have a right to know that. We still don't. So the president ordered it. He also ordered the unredacted release of all text messages related to the Russia investigation sent by Jim Comey, Andrew McCabe, Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, and Bruce Orr, the FBI officials. Well, instead of releasing them, the Department of Justice dithered for reasons that were never really clear. The president got distracted, and we've never seen those documents. It's obvious at this point that the reason for not releasing them isn't protecting American national security. They just leaked the information about the FBI investigation to the New York Times on Friday. Clearly, they have no problem leaking information when it helps them. They haven't been released because those documents might embarrass the FBI. This endless shadow investigation has caused vastly more harm to this country than any Russian Facebook ad. The president should order the declassification of all documents related to this. It's clearly an abuse of federal power. If you want to restore confidence in the federal government, bring in some sunlight. Tell the DOJ to do that. And if DOJ personnel refuse to do that, fire them and replace them with people who understand that they serve elected leaders, which is to say the electorate, which is to say voters, the people, and not the other way around. The president appears afraid to do this. He seems to be intimidated by his own lawyers. But why? What can official Washington do to him now? Call him a Russian agent? Plan to impeach him? Too late. They already have. Andy McCarthy is a former assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York, and he joins us tonight. Andy, I don't want to overstate this, but reading the justifications in the Times story for this investigation into a sitting president, it seems like FBI officials disagreed with his policy positions on Russia. Is that an appropriate pretext for a criminal investigation?
No, it's not, Tucker. It's not an appropriate pretext for the FBI for any investigation. And I must say that, listening to your monologue, it occurs to me that, since the Soviet Union fell, it's been the purpose of this government, it seems, under administrations of both parties, to treat Russia as if it were England. And I remember, the Obama debate with Mitt Romney where, Romney suggested that Russia was our greatest geopolitical enemy, and Obama mocked him for that. Obama, in a conversation with Medvedev, who is basically the cat's paw for Putin, says, thinking he's not being heard, as soon as I get by this election, I'll have more flexibility.
For an elected leader to come to these policy conclusions, therefore there must be some sinister motive. Why did no one in the FBI say, wait a second, this is demonstrably not our job, we're not allowed to do this?
Because they didn't start doing it in May 2017. In May 2017, Tucker, all they did was, as a formal paper matter, they opened an investigation specifically on Trump, but it was the same investigation that had been being conducted for a year. I keep going back to the Steele dossier. You mentioned the warrant that they got on Carter Page. That was mainly on the Steele dossier. The Steele dossier is not about Carter Page, and it's not even about prostitutes in a Moscow hotel. The theory of the Steele dossier is that Trump and Russia, Trump and the Kremlin, Trump personally and the Kremlin, are in a conspiracy, an espionage conspiracy, to subvert the election so that Trump can get in and do Russia's bidding. That was what they went to the FISA court with in order to get a warrant on Carter Page. So the theory behind this, if you look at the Steele dossier, guys like Page and Manafort and Cohen, they're sort of the emissaries between the Trump side of the conspiracy and the Kremlin side of the conspiracy. But the whole thing's about Trump. And it was always about Trump. And all that happened in May of 2017 is they went overt in their files on something that they had been covertly doing for over a year.
Well, that's such a... You are the only one I've heard make that point. It's a really smart point. Amy McCarthy, thank you very much for that. Over a year. Unbelievable.
Thanks, Tucker.
John Kirikou is a former CI officer and a whistleblower who knows the federal government very well through hard experience. John, thanks very much for coming on tonight.
Thanks for having me.
What do you... So you read that story in the New York Times on Friday. Tell me if it ratified or contradicted what you already believed about how government works.
Oh, no, this absolutely ratified what I believed about government. First of all, Andrew McCarthy is exactly right. This is what the FBI does, and it predates 2017 by at least a year. Don't forget, Tucker, that the CIA has a counterintelligence center that works very, very closely with the FBI's counterintelligence division. So just imagine at the end of 2016, Jim Clapper and John Brennan and Jim Comey sitting in a room saying, we don't like Donald Trump's positions, we should open an investigation and let it leak out later that he's a Russian spy. The FBI did this to Henry Wallace in the 1940s. They did it to Martin Luther King in the 60s, to George McGovern in 72. If they don't like you, they call you a communist or they call you a Russian dupe, and then they let the propaganda and the press take over.
I mean, why would liberals, of all people, stand by and allow that to happen? Wasn't this their fever dream, that some unaccountable cabal of bureaucrats in the national security state would subvert democracy? Why aren't they saying something about this?
Because they hate Donald Trump that much. They don't like the man, they don't like his policies, and they see the only way, or the best way, to unseat him as using what we call the deep state.
I mean, what does this mean for future presidents? I mean, if Kamala Harris, or just pick a candidate, gets elected next time or the time after that, I mean, can any president really believe that his or her bureaucracy won't try to end the presidency?
No, I think that's exactly what the problem is. And what we need here is robust congressional oversight, which we haven't had in decades.
Yes.
It should be up to the Senate and House Judiciary Committees to put a stop to this kind of nonsense before it even forms its own life. They could have smothered it in the crib, and they didn't.
They're cheering it on. John, thank you. It's great to see you, always.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, the government shutdown continues. America's border remains a mess, obviously. MS-13 gang members using a legal loophole to stay within this country's borders. That's next. Stay tuned.
We're doing karaoke later, and you're going to...
Well, a vicious MS-13 attack in New York is being blamed on America's gaping immigration loopholes. Ramon Aravello Lopez and Oscar Canales Molina allegedly took part in an MS-13 assault on two New York high school students. Both of the alleged assailants were detained at the border in 2016. But since they were unaccompanied minors at the time, they were allowed to settle in this country while awaiting deportation. Of course, they were never deported. Nobody ever is. Without that catch-and-release policy, the crime likely wouldn't have happened. Mark Morgan was head of the Border Patrol under President Obama. He was dismissed by President Trump, which you should keep in mind as you listen to him speak, and he joins us tonight. Mr. Morgan, thanks very much for coming on tonight. So, is it too much to say that this is a real-world example of what can happen if you have a dysfunctional immigration policy?
That's absolutely right, Tucker. And I think you said it right, is that it's about that the immigration process in this country across the board is broke. This is a great example. If they could look this up, the Flores decision. The Flores decision is what mandates the United States Border Patrol to release minor children. They only have a few amount of days, and once they hit that, they've got to release them, regardless if they've been properly vetted, regardless if they have a parent in the United States, they have to be released into the interior of the United States.
And so that's a judicial ruling. A court came up with that decision. Has Congress ever acted on it? I mean, since clearly that's crazy, why doesn't the United States Congress fix it?
That's a great question, Tucker. Another reason why I'm breaking my silence, because Congress could fix this in 5 minutes if they wanted to. Before I was the chief of border patrol, I was with the FBI, and I actually supervised an MS-13 gang force in Southern California. We used to catch them on surveillance wires, and they would laugh. MS-13 gang members would laugh how easy it was to go back and forth between the Mexico and U.S. border.
So we've had a number of debates on this show with Democrats who say there's something bigoted about criticizing MS-13. As someone who's actually worked to apprehend MS-13, how would you respond to that?
That's ridiculous. MS-13, and I know this may be controversial, but when the president referred to them as animals, I absolutely said that is correct. Those MS-13 members. And I can tell you, again, because I've worked it and I've been there as a chief, I've been in the detention facilities where I've walked up to these individuals that are so-called minors, 17 or under, and I've looked at them and I've looked at their eyes, Tucker, and I said, that is a soon-to-be MS-13 gang member. It's unequivocal.
And their victims are overwhelmingly immigrants themselves, right?
That's another untold story, Tucker, that I'm glad you're talking about tonight. That's absolutely correct. That's another incredulous thing. They absolutely prey on their own.
Right. So if you cared, you would care about that. Mr. Morgan, thank you very much. Mark Morgan, great to see you.
You bet.
Well, California's been staying up late, thinking of new ways to make life harder for normal people, the ones who haven't moved to Idaho yet. We'll tell you what they're doing after the break. Lawmakers and their many consultants agonized over the future of the party. They're worried because the Republican share of national elections is shrinking. Why is that? Well, focus group experts say it's because of shifting demographics, and the GOP must win over more minority voters in order to survive, particularly Hispanic voters. And that's probably true. The question is, how do you do it? And the geniuses who run the Republican Party in Washington think there's really only one way to win more Hispanic votes. You need more illegal immigration. And you need to give amnesty right away to those people who are already here illegally. Well, Democrats, needless to say, are cheering from the sidelines. They agree with this strongly. It helps them. But is it factually true as a political matter? It's worth thinking about that. A closer look at the numbers suggests that Hispanic opinion on immigration is a lot more complex than they're telling you on television. A Harvard-Harris poll last summer found that a majority of Hispanics want stricter enforcement of America's immigration laws. According to a Pew survey, meanwhile, only 14% of American Hispanics think our country needs more immigrants. Fully a quarter believe America has too many immigrants already. And the most anti-immigration Hispanics of all are those who are foreign-born, less educated, and speak mostly Spanish. Why is that? It's obvious. These are the very people who face the stiffest competition over wages from future waves of lower-skilled immigrants. So it turns out that opening the borders is not the key to winning the Hispanic vote. So what is the key? Well, maybe allowing parents to raise their own children. How about that? Turns out Hispanic voters are for that passionately. One Pew survey showed that 73% of Hispanic Americans believe it is better to have one parent stay at home to raise children rather than having both parents work. That's well above the national average on that question of about 60%. Hispanics put their belief into practice, too. 38% of Hispanic mothers stay at home when their kids are small. That's 9% above the national average. So think about what that means for a minute in political terms. 3/4 of Hispanic voters believe a parent should stay at home to raise children, but less than half can actually afford to do that. That means there are millions of Hispanic parents who wish they could be at home raising their kids, but they can't be because they can't afford it. So here's a crazy idea for the Republican Party and its legions of overpaid consultants. Why not work to give these voters what they want most? Why not run on a platform that unites children with their parents at home? 19 unhappy social activists on Twitter would not like this, but who cares? Those people are miserable and pathetic, and there is no reason they should have this level of control over our society. How about ignoring them for once? Republicans ought to make giving parents the choice to raise their own kids their party's top priority. Hispanic voters would love that. Voters of all colors would love that. Why wouldn't they love that? Nothing would make this a happier country. Well, now we head to California, which was once the greatest place to live, really, in the world, and it's becoming tougher to live in California by the day. What's happening? Trace Gallagher is on this story for us tonight. Trace?
Well, how about a new water tax, Tucker? Governor Gavin Newsom hasn't said what the new water tax would cost California residents, but a similar proposal by former Governor Jerry Brown would have run residents 95 cents a month. That measure was abandoned after failing to get support in the legislature. Newsom says this time around the effort is aimed at providing clean drinking water in some of the state's rural towns and cities, but the Association of California Water Agencies says the tax is unnecessary because the state has many alternate funding solutions. And the Howard Jarvis Taxpayer Association called the proposal an example of, quote, California's knee-jerk reaction to default to a new tax whenever there is a new problem. Meantime, California has already banned plastic bags and straws. Now paper receipts are on the chopping block. One Democratic state lawmaker wants to make it illegal to give out a paper receipt unless the customer specifically wants one. Supporters say paper receipts are coated in unhealthy chemicals. And by the way, if this passes, each violation would result in a $25 fine for the businesses. Tucker.
That'll work. Trace Gallagher, great to see you.
You too.
Author and columnist Mark Stein joins us tonight. You know, sometimes, Mark, you hear an idea that's so brilliant, it's a transformative idea. It's almost like when Galileo got back from stargazing and hit you with it. And you're like, yeah, that makes sense. I was walking down Market Street today, in fact, in San Francisco, and there are people passed out, and there's human feces all over the sidewalk. And it occurred to me, if only they would ban paper receipts, maybe all of this would be better.
Yes, I think so. As Trace was saying, these paper receipts contain a chemical called BPA, which, if you eat it in high quantities, can cause birth defects. And clearly, that's why California last year had the lowest fertility rate in its entire history, because people aren't having any births because they're eating too many receipts. If you go to a Beverly Hills restaurant and the waiter says, do you want the curly endive salad? And the lady says, no, I'll just have the receipt and a glass of water. Oh, no, wait, I can't afford the tax on the water. Just bring me the receipt. I had a 40 receipt a day habit. I used to buy packs of cigarettes just so I could eat the receipts. But I actually think, Tucker, there's a serious point in this. The beneficiary of this would be the Twitter guy who also makes these little square machines that you see, which issue the electronic receipts. Yes. And if you think about it, Tucker, just as social media has meant that news and information and knowledge is just in the hands of 4 or 5 companies around the world now, imagine if actual money just came under the control of the same 4 or 5 people who control social media. I'd rather have a paper receipt than the Twitter guy controlling receipts.
Well, okay, so but that's not actually a crazy thing to say, because there are, as you know, proposals every year to do away with paper money and to make everything paperless.
Absolutely.
So why, at a time when big tech has shown no respect for the First Amendment, for freedom of association, for really any right at all, where they ape communist China, why would we trust them to control all of our commercial transactions?
Because I think there is now a generation of people who think this is entirely normal. I mean, I don't want to go all, electromagnetic pulse on you, but one of the problems with that is if that ever does happen, we'll be going back to the mid-19th century, but with a population that no longer knows what people knew in the mid-19th century, including that it sometimes helps to be able to have paper receipts. It sometimes helps not to deliver more and more of the daily functioning of the world into the same 4 or 5 companies.
That's so... I actually hadn't put those together, but I should have. That's why we're always so grateful to have you on. Mark Stein, a genius.
Thanks a lot, Tucker.
Thank you. So the latest FBI revelations. Friday in the New York Times, we learned that the Bureau did not agree with the president's policy positions on Russia, and so they accused him internally of being a spy for Russia. Are the Democrats okay with that? We'll ask one after the break.